I didn't collapse at work, or in a parking lot, or behind the wheel like the stories you hear on the news. I collapsed in the front row of my daughter's school auditorium, under bright stage lights that made every dust particle look like it had somewhere important to be, right when my 8-year-old lifted her chin and started scanning the crowd for me. I remember the feeling of those plastic folding chairs against the back of my legs, the thin paper program sweating in my hand because the room was too warm and I'd run in late. Again, with my phone still buzzing from a manager's text, and my brain still half at my second job, even though my body was planted right there like a promise I intended to keep. My daughter's class stood in matching shirts, rows of small shoulders, small faces trying so hard to be brave. The piano teacher raised her hands. Someone behind me whispered for a child to stop fidgeting. I tried to take a slow breath and tell myself, "You made it. You showed up." Then something inside me shifted, quietly at first, like a light bulb flickering. The stage lights smeared at the edges. The sound in the room didn't disappear, it just flattened, as if someone had pressed a thick pillow over the world. My tongue felt heavy, like it belonged to someone else. I blinked hard, waiting for my body to correct itself the way it always did after a long day. But it didn't. My right hand loosened around the program without me telling it to. The paper slid down my thigh. My arm wouldn't follow the simple instruction to pick it up. I tried to laugh it off in my own head. Too much caffeine, too little sleep, you're just tired. And then the fear arrived, sharp and clean, because I realized this wasn't tiredness. This was a door closing. Just picture this for a moment. Your child is on stage, searching for you with her eyes, and your body is suddenly refusing to answer you. Like you're still there, but you can't raise a hand to prove it. The last clear thing I remember is her gaze moving from face to face, landing near me, and her expression tightening into a tiny question, "Mom?" And I couldn't give her the one thing she was asking for, proof that I was really there. Before that night, my life was built out of alarms and lists, and I wore both like a uniform. I was 39, a single mom, and the kind of person other people described as strong because it made them feel better about how much I carried. I worked one job that paid the bills and another that kept the lights from feeling like they might blink out if I exhaled too hard. Mornings were a blur of lunchboxes, missing socks, permission slips, and me standing at the sink staring at the coffee maker like it was a machine that could turn exhaustion into a personality. My daughter, Lily, was 8, all bright eyes and questions, the kind of kid who still believed a parent could fix anything just by being close. And I loved her so much it scared me, which is a strange thing to admit, but it's true. Love that deep can make you superstitious. It can make you guarded. So I acted tough. I acted efficient. I acted like feelings were a luxury item we couldn't afford. I told myself I was doing it for her. But for her, slowly turned into a shield I hid behind. At dinner, I'd nod while she talked about school, but my eyes would drift to my phone because there was always a message that needed answering, always a shift to confirm, always a bank app to check like I could stare our money problems into behaving. Lily would say, "Mom, look," and I'd say, "I am looking," even when I wasn't. I'd kiss the top of her head while my brain kept running numbers. I'd say just a second, so often that it became the background music of our house. I didn't think of myself as emotionally distant. I thought of myself as responsible. And my body was giving me little warnings I treated like spam emails. Headaches that bloomed behind my eyes and made light feel harsh. A fluttery tightness in my chest when I climbed stairs too fast. A blood pressure prescription I filled once, then forgot to refill because forgetting was easier than admitting I needed it. I ran on caffeine and stubbornness, and I told myself sleep was optional because people like me didn't get the luxury of slowing down. Have you ever convinced yourself that you're doing the right thing? Working harder, pushing through, staying tough, only to realize later you were also disappearing from the people who needed you most? That recital was supposed to be my proof. A clean, simple promise. I will be there. I will show up. I will watch her face, not my screen. And I did show up. I just didn't understand how close I was to not being able to show up at all. The scary part about what happened to me is that it didn't feel like a dramatic countdown. It felt like normal life, just slightly heavier. It started with little things I dismissed because dismissing was my talent. I'd wake up with a headache that wasn't quite pain, more like pressure, like someone had tightened a band around my skull while I slept. I'd stand in the shower, and let the hot water hit the back of my neck and tell myself it was stress. It was always stress. Stress was my explanation for everything that didn't fit. At work, I'd catch myself rereading the same email 3 times because the words weren't sticking. I'd lose my train of thought mid-sentence and cover it with a joke. I'd feel my heart kick up in my chest for no reason and pretend it was just too much coffee, even when the coffee hadn't touched my lips yet. I knew my blood pressure was high. I'd been told. I'd been warned in that calm voice doctors use when they're trying not to scare you, but you can hear the fear underneath it anyway. They'd said things like risk and stroke and we need to manage this now. And I'd nodded like a cooperative adult, then walked out and immediately returned to being the person who handled everything alone. Because that's what I believed. If I kept moving, nothing could catch me. There were days I'd feel dizzy when I stood up too fast, and I'd grip the counter until the room steadied. Then I'd keep going. There were nights I'd lie in bed and realize I hadn't taken a full breath in hours, like my chest was doing the minimum to keep me functional. I'd tell myself I'd schedule an appointment next week when things calmed down. Next week became next month. Next month became a blurry promise I stopped making out loud. Lily noticed more than I gave her credit for. Kids do. They don't always understand, but they feel the weather in a room the same way you feel a storm coming in your bones. "Mom, your face is red," she said one evening while I was stirring boxed mac and cheese with one hand and scrolling with the other. "I'm fine, honey. Just hot," I said, even though the apartment was cool. She stepped closer, peered up at me like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "Are you mad?" That question hit me harder than it should have, because it made me realize how often my exhaustion must have looked like anger. "No," I lied gently. "Not mad. Just tired." She took that in. Then, quietly, she reached for my phone and lowered it like a curtain. "Can you just be here for 1 minute?" 1 minute. Like I was so unavailable, she had to negotiate for 60 seconds. Try to feel what I felt in that moment. This tiny, sweet request wrapped around a truth I didn't want to face. Because I wanted to say yes right away. I wanted to scoop her up and prove she mattered more than any shift, any deadline, any bank balance. But my reflex was still the same old one. "Just let me finish this," I said, eyes flicking back to the screen, and I watched her shoulders drop a fraction of an inch, like a small part of her had learned not to expect too much. That's the part people don't talk about when they talk about burnout. It doesn't only drain you. It drains the room around you. It teaches your child to stop reaching for you because the reaching keeps coming back empty. By the time recital week arrived, I'd been living like that for so long it felt normal. Headaches, fast heart, short sleep, long days, short patience. And still, I told myself I was fine. Because I didn't know fine can be the last word you say to yourself before your body proves you wrong. The day of the recital, I ran like my life depended on it. Because in a way, it did, and I still didn't know that. My first job started early. I moved through the hours on autopilot, smiling when I needed to, snapping when I didn't have the energy to soften, sipping coffee like it was oxygen. Around lunchtime, a headache showed up and stayed, a dull pressure behind my left eye that made the fluorescent lights feel too bright, too loud. I swallowed 2 painkillers with cold water and kept going. I told myself I'd rest after the recital. I told myself I'd be present after the recital. I told myself a lot of things that day, the way you tell yourself stories when you're trying to keep the wheels from coming off. At home, Lily was bouncing around in her matching shirt, excited in that pure, unguarded way kids have, the way they're excited even if their world has been quietly disappointed before. "Mom, we have to be there early," she reminded me, checking the clock like she'd been appointed the responsible adult. "I know," I said, checking my phone. She made a small sound, nothing dramatic, just a breath that carried frustration, and she didn't say anything else. That silence stung more than words would have. It was the silence of a kid who already knew what the pattern was. We drove to the school with the sky turning that soft evening color, the one that makes you feel like you should slow down and notice your life. I didn't slow down. My mind kept darting to money, rent, groceries, the late fee I'd barely avoided last month, and I held the steering wheel too tight, like gripping harder could control time. In the parking lot, parents were already streaming toward the doors with folded chairs, flowers, cameras. There was laughter. There was the squeak of sneakers on pavement. Lily grabbed my hand and pulled me, her little fingers warm and determined, and I let her lead because for once I wanted to follow. Inside, the auditorium smelled like old carpet and stage dust, and that faint metallic scent of a school building that's been cleaned 1,000 times with the same chemicals. The lights were dim over the seats, but harsh on stage. I could see children milling behind the curtain, little flashes of movement and color. We found our section. I sat in the front row because Lily had begged me to, because she wanted to be able to see my face, because she wanted the kind of reassurance that only a parent's eyes can give. "Promise you'll watch me the whole time," she said, leaning in close. "I promise," I told her, and I meant it with everything I had. She ran off to join her class, and I watched her go. There's a moment when your child walks away from you toward a stage, toward a world where you can't follow, and you feel this strange mix of pride and fear. Pride because they're growing. Fear because you know you won't always be able to protect them from everything that hurts. I sat down and tried to settle my breathing. The headache was still there, now spreading like a bruise across my forehead. I lifted my hand to my temple and pressed, as if pressure could erase pressure. My phone vibrated. I looked without thinking. A message from my second job asking if I could cover a shift. I stared at it for a second, thumb hovering. And then Lily's teacher stepped up to the microphone, and I forced my phone face down on my lap like an apology. The recital began. Children filed onto the risers in neat lines. There were squeaks and coughs, and whispered reminders from the teachers. The piano started. The sound was bright and slightly off, the way it always is in school auditoriums. But to me it was beautiful because it was hers. Lily found her spot. She adjusted her shirt. She lifted her chin. Then she looked out into the crowd. I saw her scanning. I saw her eyes moving from face to face, searching for one specific thing. Me. And that should have been the moment I softened. That should have been the moment my whole chest opened up. That should have been the moment I thought, this is what matters. Instead, my body chose that exact second to betray me. At first it was subtle. The stage lights seemed to glare harder. The edge of my vision shimmered, like heat rising off asphalt. I blinked and tried to refocus. The music sounded like it was coming from underwater. I swallowed and realized my mouth had gone dry, but not in a normal way. My tongue felt thick, sluggish, like it was wrapped in cotton. I tried to shift in my seat, and my right leg didn't respond the way it should have. It moved, but late, like there was a delay between my thought and my body's agreement. I told myself, stand up, step out, get some air. My hands gripped the edges of the chair. I tried to push up. My right hand slid off like it had forgotten what gripping was. Panic hit fast, not like anxiety, but like something older, animal, and urgent. My heart started pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I opened my mouth to call someone, anyone, to say, something's wrong. No sound came out. Or maybe something did, but it didn't sound like words. It felt like my brain was reaching for language and finding empty shelves. Have you ever tried to speak and realized the connection between your mind and your mouth isn't there? Imagine that for 1 second. Imagine knowing exactly what you want to say and your body refusing to translate it. I turned my head toward the aisle, trying to catch someone's attention. The motion was jerky, wrong. The auditorium tilted slightly, like the floor had become unreliable. Lily's class started singing. Her voice was there, small and clear, and my whole chest ached because I wanted to look at her properly. I wanted to smile. I wanted to lift my hand and let her see me. But I couldn't lift my hand. I could see her eyes still searching, still trying to lock onto me in the crowd. And in that moment, a thought sliced through me, so clean it almost felt calm. She's going to think I chose work over her again. That thought was worse than the fear of dying. It was worse than the confusion. It was worse than the physical helplessness. Because it carried every time I'd said, just a second. Every time I'd been there, but not really there. My vision narrowed. The bright stage became a smear of light. The sound of the song stretched and warped. I tried again to stand, and my body folded instead, heavy on one side like gravity had chosen a favorite. Someone in the row behind me hissed, "Ma'am," like they weren't sure if they were allowed to interrupt. A hand touched my shoulder. "Are you okay?" I tried to answer. My mouth moved. Nothing usable came out. The teacher's voice continued through the microphone, cheerful and unaware, introducing the next verse, while my world split into two realities at once. Children singing under bright lights, and me sliding out of my own body's control in public, in the front row, in the exact place I'd sworn I would be steady. I felt myself tipping. The chair edge pressed into my thigh. The program fluttered to the floor again, and this time it felt symbolic, like everything I thought I held together was dropping out of my grip. Voices rose around me, sharp, urgent. Call 911. She's having a seizure. No, wait, look at her face. Ma'am, can you squeeze my hand? The words came to me like distant echoes. I understood them, but responding felt like trying to move through wet cement. The last thing I saw clearly was Lily, still singing, eyes wide now, because something in the front row had drawn her attention. I saw her mouth hesitate on the lyric. I saw her posture stiffen, confusion spreading across her face like ink in water. And then everything dimmed, not like a dramatic blackout, but like someone slowly turning down the volume on the world. The song kept going without me. And my biggest terror, as I slipped into that fog, wasn't the ambulance or the hospital or even the word stroke. It was the idea of my daughter standing on that stage, watching her mother disappear and not knowing if it was on purpose. I didn't go somewhere bright. I didn't see anything mystical. What happened next was messier than that, more human. It was like being trapped in a room made of fog, where sounds and memories floated in and out without asking permission. I could feel pieces of the world, pressure, movement, the shift of air, but I couldn't organize them into a clear timeline. One moment, there was the auditorium. The next, there were voices that didn't belong to anyone I knew, and the sharp smell of something sterile, and then nothing again. I remember a siren at some point, but it sounded far away, like it was meant for someone else. I remember the sensation of being lifted, straps across my body, my own weight suddenly not mine to control. I remember trying to tell myself to stay awake, to hold on, like staying awake was a moral decision I could make if I tried hard enough. But the deeper truth was simpler. My body was doing something without my consent, and my mind was forced to watch. If you've never experienced that kind of helplessness, it's hard to explain without sounding dramatic. So let me ask you gently, have you ever had a moment where you realized your willpower didn't matter? Where the thing you always trusted, your own body, stopped listening? That's what it felt like. In that fog, my thoughts weren't organized sentences. They were flashes. Small, sharp images that carried more emotion than logic. Lily's face, turned toward the front row, looking for me. Not angry, not accusing, just confused, like her mind was trying to understand why her mother wasn't doing the simplest thing in the world, watching her. My kitchen at home, the late-night glow of the microwave clock. Lily's sock on the floor that I'd stepped over twice because I was too tired to bend down. My phone in my hand, always in my hand, like I was gripping the illusion of control. And then, this one hit like a physical blow. The memory of Lily standing in the doorway of my bedroom a few weeks earlier, holding a drawing she'd made. She'd been smiling in that hopeful way kids smile when they still believe attention is something they can earn. "Mom, I made this for you," she'd said. I'd been sitting on the edge of the bed, laptop open, answering work emails. I glanced up, smiled, and said, "That's beautiful, honey. Put it on the fridge, okay?" I didn't even stand up. I didn't even take it from her hands. I just pointed her away gently, like love was something that could be managed on a schedule. In the fog, that memory expanded until it felt like a courtroom. Not a loud one, not dramatic, just me sitting there, forced to witness myself without excuses. I realized something that hurt more than the physical fear. I had been treating my daughter like she was part of my workload instead of the reason I was working at all. And the worst part was, I hadn't meant to. That's what regret really is, I think. It's not just guilt. It's the moment you realize you can cause harm without intending to, simply by being absent in the wrong ways for too long. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry. I see it now. I see you." But inside that fog, I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I couldn't reach through whatever was happening and undo all the tiny moments I treated as small. There was a point where I became aware of terror again. Pure, physical terror, because I understood, in a way I'd never understood before, that I might not come back. Not in a poetic way. In a practical way. I might not wake up to make her lunch again. I might not hear her complain about homework. I might not get annoyed at glitter in the carpet. I might not be there for the next recital, or the next birthday, or the next "Mom, look." And that fear didn't feel like darkness. It felt like losing access to ordinary life. Like being evicted from your own home without warning. Just picture it for a moment. The smallest things you take for granted. The sound of your child brushing teeth. The way they run barefoot down a hallway, the quiet weight of them falling asleep on the couch, suddenly becoming things you might never experience again. In that inner space, the truth finally came through clean. I had been living like love was proven by sacrifice alone, by working more, by pushing harder, by staying tough, by never asking for help. But sacrifice without presence is just absence with a good excuse. And the thought that tore through me, over and over, was this: if I die right now, she's going to remember my back turned to her more than my hands providing for her. That realization wasn't gentle. It wasn't motivational. It was brutal, because it made me see that I had been so proud of being reliable that I'd forgotten reliability means showing up emotionally, not just financially. Somewhere beyond the fog, I heard a voice say a name, mine. I heard someone counting. I heard the clipped urgency of medical language that didn't sound like comfort. It sounded like work. And in the middle of all that, one clear thought rose up like a hand breaking the surface of water. Please, let me come back. Not to work, not to prove anything, just to be her mom the way she deserves. That was the closest thing to a prayer I've ever made. Coming back didn't feel like waking up from sleep. It felt like crawling up from underwater with lungs that didn't remember how to be lungs. The first thing I noticed was sound, steady, rhythmic, not music, not voices, but something mechanical. A soft, repeating beep that made my brain try to count time even though I didn't know what day it was. Then I noticed light, pale and clinical, coming through my eyelids like a thin sheet pulled too tight. I tried to open my eyes and couldn't at first. The effort felt enormous, like lifting something heavy with a muscle I hadn't used in years. When my eyes finally cracked open, the world was blurred at the edges, washed in white and pale blue, and my mouth felt wrong, dry, thick, as if it had been packed with cotton. I swallowed, and the swallow didn't work the way it should. Panic flashed hot in my chest. I tried to say, "Where am I?" And what came out was a sound that embarrassed me immediately. Slurred, incomplete, not the voice I recognized as mine. A nurse appeared in my field of vision, moving gently, like she understood exactly how fragile my fear was. She had tired eyes and kind hands. She leaned close enough that her face became the clearest thing in the room. "Hey," she said softly, like she was talking to someone who might spook. "You're in the hospital. You're safe. You had a stroke, okay? You're awake now." The word stroke landed heavy, not because I didn't know what it meant, but because I did. I knew what it could steal. I knew the stories people told in whispers about someone being different afterward, about years of rehab, about speech that never fully returned. I tried to move my right arm. It didn't lift. The fear came back, sharp and humiliating, because in my head the command was clear, move. But my body answered with nothing. My fingers twitched slightly, like a faint signal, and even that tiny movement made tears sting behind my eyes. "Easy," the nurse murmured. "Don't fight it all at once. You're going to have weakness on one side. That's normal right now. We're going to work with you. Normal right now." As if my life had just been divided into before and after, and this was the normal of the after. I turned my head slowly, scanning, needing something familiar. The room smelled like disinfectant and warm plastic. There were tubes, wires, things taped to my skin. The sheet over my legs felt stiff, like it had been starched into obedience. My throat burned slightly when I tried to breathe too deep. Then I saw a small bouquet of paper flowers in a cup on the windowsill. Construction paper, crayon, a child's handwriting on a folded note. Lily. My heart seemed to squeeze down on itself. I made a sound, half her name, half a sob. The nurse's expression softened even more. "Your daughter's okay," she said quickly, like she knew that was the question behind everything. She was scared, but she's okay. A family friend is with her right now. She'll be back soon. I stared at the paper flowers like they were proof that I hadn't lost my whole life. "When?" I tried to ask. "Later today," the nurse said. "We want you rested first. You've been through a lot." Through a lot. It sounded so small compared to the terror I still felt inside my bones. A little while later, minutes or hours, I truly didn't know. A doctor came in and explained things in careful language. I caught pieces: ischemic, blood pressure, time matters. We stabilized you. Rehab will be important. I nodded like I understood, but my mind kept circling one thing like a planet stuck in orbit. What did Lily see? Because I could handle pain. I could handle fear. I'd handled hard things my whole adult life. But the idea of my daughter watching me collapse, watching me become unresponsive, hit somewhere deeper, somewhere no amount of toughness could armor. When Lily finally came in, she didn't run to me the way she used to. She stepped into the room carefully, like she wasn't sure what version of me she was allowed to approach. She was holding her backpack straps tight in both hands. Her eyes were red-rimmed, like she'd been trying not to cry for a long time. She looked smaller than I remembered, and that broke something in me. I tried to smile. My face didn't cooperate fully. My mouth tilted unevenly, and I saw her react. Just a flicker, like she'd noticed the difference. "Hi, baby," I said, and my voice came out thick and strange. She stared at me for a second, and then she whispered, barely audible, "Are you mad at me?" That question hit like a punch, because it told me exactly how she'd been interpreting my distance even before this. "No," I forced out, tears spilling now because I couldn't stop them. "No, never." She took 2 small steps closer. "I looked for you," she said, voice trembling. I looked and looked. Try to imagine hearing that from your child. Imagine the guilt of knowing you were physically there, but your body failed right when she needed your eyes. I lifted my left hand, the one I could control, and reached toward her. My fingers shook. It was clumsy and slow, but it was my best attempt at saying, "I'm here. I'm still here." She came to the side of the bed and let me touch her hand. Her skin was warm, real, alive, and she finally cried, quietly, like she'd been holding it in until she could make sure I was real again. "I thought you didn't want to see me," she whispered. That was the moment I understood. My stroke hadn't only threatened my life. It had cracked open every emotional shortcut I'd been taking, every just a second I'd used to delay being present. I squeezed her hand with what strength I had and tried to speak through my tears. "I'm sorry," I said, slow and slurred but honest. "I'm here. I'm going to try." Rehab is where pride goes to get stripped down to its bare frame. In the hospital, people see you as a patient. In rehab, they see you as a person who has to rebuild themselves from the smallest pieces, and that's somehow harder. The days were structured like a job I never applied for. Physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, each one asking me to do things I used to do without thinking, and each one reminding me, over and over, that my body had changed the rules. The first time I tried to button my own shirt, I cried. It wasn't a dramatic scene. It was quiet, humiliating. My right hand wouldn't pinch and guide the button the way my left could. My fingers felt like they belonged to someone else, like they were borrowed and untrained. I stared at that tiny plastic button like it was mocking me, and this wave of anger rose up. Anger at my body, anger at time, anger at the fact that the strongest version of me had disappeared without asking. A therapist, Janelle, sat beside me and waited without rushing, like she understood that the emotional part of rehab is just as real as the physical part. "You've been doing everything alone for a long time, haven't you?" she said gently. I didn't answer at first, because answering would make it true. Then I nodded, and the nod felt like surrender. Learning to speak clearly again was its own kind of frustration. I could hear the mistakes in my words as they came out, and I hated how slow I sounded, like my mouth couldn't keep up with my mind. I had built my whole identity on being competent, fast, reliable, the one who handled things. Now I needed help to stand, help to walk, help to tie a shoe. I had to ask permission for the bathroom. I had to accept hands guiding me. If you've never had to accept help when your whole life has been built around being the helper, just picture it for a moment. Picture your independence as a coat you've worn so long it feels like skin, and then one day someone takes it off you and says, "We're going to keep you alive, but you're going to have to let us." That was rehab. And yet, this is the part that surprised me. Small victories felt like miracles. The first time I held a spoon steadily enough to feed myself, I stared at it like it was evidence that my life wasn't over. It was such a ridiculous thing to be proud of, and still I was. My hand shook. The motion was slower than it used to be, but I got the spoon from bowl to mouth without spilling. I did it again. And again. Janelle clapped softly like it mattered. And it did matter. Lily visited whenever she could. At first, she was careful around me. She'd bring little drawings and set them on the tray table, like she was offering peace offerings to a version of her mother she didn't fully trust yet. She'd smile, but her eyes would keep checking my face, searching for signs that I might disappear again. One afternoon, when I was exhausted and frustrated and trying not to snap at my own weakness, I heard something through the half-closed door. A child's voice. Soft, shaky singing. It took me a second to realize it was Lily, standing in the hallway with her teacher, practicing the recital song again, quietly, like she was trying to rewrite the memory. My chest tightened. I lay still, listening, because I didn't want to interrupt her. Her voice was small and brave, and there was a tremble in it that didn't belong to a carefree kid. It belonged to a kid who had learned that adults can break. When she finished, she whispered, "Did Mom hear it?" Her teacher said, "I think she did." Lily replied, "Good. Because I want her to look at me this time." That sentence rearranged something inside me. It wasn't anger that made me change after that. It was clarity. In the weeks that followed, I started doing what I should have done years earlier, even though it scared me. I asked for help. I called a financial counselor through the hospital program and laid out my situation without pretending it was fine. We made a plan: consolidate debts, cut expenses that were draining me, apply for assistance I'd been too proud to consider. I talked to my manager and told the truth, not the polished version. I had a stroke. I am not the same right now. I will come back, but I need time. I let myself be a human being instead of a machine. When I finally came home, the apartment looked the same, but I didn't. The sink still dripped. The hallway light still flickered. But I moved slower through the space, and slowing down made me notice things I'd been missing for years. The way Lily's shoes were always kicked off near the couch, the smell of her shampoo after bath time, the warmth of her small body leaning against me while we watched a cartoon. I started building new rituals, not huge dramatic ones, small ones that were actually sustainable. A short walk in the morning, even if it was slow. A blood pressure cuff on the counter where I couldn't ignore it. Water before coffee. A bedtime routine where my phone stayed on the kitchen table, not in my hand, because Lily deserved my face, not the blue glow of a screen. And sometimes, when I felt the old panic rise, the fear of bills, the urge to push harder, I'd look at Lily and remember the front row of that auditorium. Remember her scanning the crowd, and I'd choose differently. Not perfectly, not every day, but more often. Because I finally understood something that should have been obvious. Love isn't proven by how much you sacrifice until you break. Sometimes love is proven by staying alive. I wish I could tell you I woke up after that stroke and became a perfectly calm, perfectly present mother overnight. But real life doesn't work like that, and honestly, I don't trust stories that pretend it does. What changed wasn't that my problems disappeared. What changed was the way I finally saw what I was trading away every time I said later. Because later isn't a guaranteed place. It's a story we tell ourselves when we're scared to slow down. I still think about that auditorium sometimes. The bright lights, the children singing, Lily's eyes searching. I think about how the most terrifying part wasn't the hospital or the rehab or the weakness in my hand. The most terrifying part was the possibility that my daughter would grow up believing her mother was always physically present but emotionally unavailable, and that this was what love looked like. So here's what I'll ask you, gently, without preaching. Have you been ignoring something important because you're convinced you'll handle it after this week or after things calm down? Have you been treating your body like it's an inconvenience instead of the only home you actually live in? Just picture the person you love most, your child, your partner, your parent, looking for you in a crowd or at a doorway or across a dinner table. Picture what it would cost if you couldn't answer them with your eyes. If you still have the chance to say something kind, don't leave it for later. If you still have the chance to show up, fully, quietly, without your screen between you, try to do it while you can. You might not notice it every day, but being loved and having someone to love may be the rarest gift we get in this life.